This is Out of Bounds. If it's happening in the world of golf, we're talking about it. Coverage, debate, discussion, pro golf and local golf. Let's do it. This is Out of Bounds. And here are your hosts, Nate Sharman and Josh Durso.
Welcome back to the Out of Bounds podcast. But here in 2026, our first episode as we get ready for the golf season. I'm Nate Sharman, joined by Josh Durso. And Josh, golf is back and another player's back. Five-time major champion Brooks Koepka. We'll get into that. But Josh, how pumped are you for the year 2026 and the golf world, right?
Pumped. I'm pumped for this year because I think this might be the last year that we see the schedule that we have come to know and love. I think this is going to be the last time we see the start in Hawaii, the last time we see it in January. I think we're going to have to soak this up. We're going to have to soak these like minus 32 or 32, 34 under tournaments, right?
Yeah, it's weird that we didn't start the Century last week, right? You know, that's something that we've grown accustomed to over the last few years, right? And couldn't play there due to course conditions with that drought, but still starting in Hawaii as we go to the Sony at Wiley Country Club. But first, let's talk about Brooks. I know it's just been a huge storyline in the golf world. I think if you go on our TikTok, and our last 3 or 4 TikToks has been me talking about Brooks Koepka, me talking about the 5-time major champion who's come back to the PGA Tour. And it's pretty cool to just not even a couple of weeks where this has all happened. During the holidays, he announces that he's done at LIV. He's got 1 year left on his contract at LIV, but he doesn't want to play there anymore. Says he wants to spend more time with family, right, Josh? Which is, I think, oddly enough, the same thing he said when he went to LIV a couple of years ago. But yeah, he's not going to play LIV Golf. And then a couple weeks later, he's applied for reinstatement on the PGA Tour. A week later, it's granted. It's amazing how fast this has happened.
Yeah. And before we get into the whole, like what the rules are of his comeback or the stipulations, how much do you think the fact that LIV was really in pursuit of world ranking points at any cost and kind of restructuring itself to look more like just the regular old PGA Tour went into him ultimately wanting to go back to the PGA Tour?
I think a lot, Josh, and I think that's a really good point because, you know, just a stupid example, they stopped wearing shorts, right? They've gone to pants. They play 72 holes now. So it's a little bit of a mimic of the PGA Tour elevated events, right? So I think it goes to say that it's basically the same thing as PGA Tour at this point. You know, the events are very similar. So why not play on the best tour in the world and one with all the history? Might as well play there.
Yeah. And proof that it's not all about money too, right? Because obviously he's going to be having to make some charitable donations and he's going to be losing out on some equity opportunity here within the PGA Tour moving forward. But also, like, you know, it wasn't just about the money for him. Obviously, he wanted to play on the PGA Tour, money aside, because there certainly would have been a lot more guaranteed money for him to re-sign with LIV, where they just obviously don't care about accounting.
Right. So on Monday, like I said, they announced that Brooks is going to come back to the PGA Tour, and the PGA Tour released this big, long statement. They love releasing the statements, right? And basically, I'll sum it up here for you. I think Monday Q did a great job on Twitter. So taking a little bit from him here, but so he's not going to give a spot in the elevated events. You'll see him in a couple weeks at Torrey. So he's going to be playing in the non-elevated events at first. And a big thing that people were worried about is that this is going to take a spot from some of the smaller guys. And that's not going to happen. Every field that Brooks Koepka's in is going to be increased by 1. And I think that's huge because I don't think these lower tier guys should be not rewarded for Brooks wanting to come back. So it's really big that they figured that out. No equity in the PGA Tour for 5 years. This is really big as the PGA Tour has switched to a for-profit entity over the last year, and so I'm sure that was a big negotiation tactic for both sides. He's not going to be eligible for bonuses at the end of the year. These huge FedEx Cup bonuses that these guys get. He's not going to be eligible for it. He's going to pay a fee, which is like you said, the donation. I think it's about $5 million, straight $5 million in principal that he's going to be given as a donation. And so all of these are probably going to be about 50, maybe 60 million in penalties, I guess, if you wanted to equate that into money. So definitely, I think a pretty good slap on the wrist for the PGA Tour, but one I think that is very fair for both sides. I think Brooks, he went over there and made a slew of money in terms of the signing bonus and tournament purses, right? Whether they be the team purses or the individual. But Josh, do you think this is a great idea for the PGA Tour and for a good idea for Brooks to come back?
It's a no-brainer. Like, to me, you know, any guy who wants to come back, the PGA Tour should figure out a way to get them back. And, you know, when it comes to a guy like Brooks, fan favorite, you know, yeah, he hasn't played the best golf the last 2 years, but at the end of the day, his star power is worth bringing him over, especially when you think about he's going to be playing in non-elevated events, the non-signature events where fewer people have a reason to watch anyway. So you're going to be like infusing this Brooks Koepka energy into these non-signature events. And, just think about what it could potentially mean for the PGA Tour in terms of storyline as we go forward through this year. If, for example, he comes back and wins one of these non-elevated events and then plays his way back into signature events and is contending. He's on the older side of prime, but he is certainly not washed by any means. And, if he wants to play, that seems to be the most important thing when it comes to Brooks Koepka. If he wants to play, he can play very good golf. So for the PGA Tour, it's all upside, especially when you consider the fact that he agreed to all the things, all the stipulations of coming back. And, the only people, like we were talking about before we came on here, the only people I feel like that may be a little frustrated or feel burned by this would be the middle tier guys, maybe the guys who are ranked, outside, say, top 75 in FedEx money. But at the end of the day, they all, just like he will, have the opportunity to play their way in to anything they want to do. So like you always say, play better.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's that you hit the nail right on the head there. I think in 2 weeks when Brooks is teeing up at Torrey, I think there's going to be a ton of buzz when the tee times drop. What time's he teeing up? What time is Brooks you getting ready to go? And I think the ESPN Plus numbers are going to be crazy that morning. When people are watching Brooks hit that first tee shot and see what happens. Maybe he starts with a birdie. Maybe he makes his return to PGA Tour and he contends at Torrey Pines. How cool would that be? But I think that just is so interesting for the tour because it's flipped to a for-profit entity. So I think if this was a year and a half ago, I think the process would take a lot longer than a couple weeks to get him back on the tour, and B, there would be a lot more hesitation, between the CEO at PGA Tour moving to Brian Rolap and how that's changed things. But yeah, the for-profit entity I think has changed a lot. Going into your conversation there, Josh, do you think Brooks will play well in a couple weeks at Torrey?
I don't know. I guess the first week is going to be kind of the toss-up, right? Like we don't necessarily know where his game is. Like I said before, I think the best indicator about where Brooks is with his game is his interest level in playing.
Right.
And he has interest in playing. So I would assume that he feels like his game is at minimum within reach. And if it's within reach, will he contend that first week? I don't know. My guess would probably be that there's some, cobwebs to shake out.
Yes.
With competitive golf on the PGA Tour, because LIV is different than the PGA Tour. But, if he shows some promise, or if he, shows that he can even vaguely contend when the pressure's dialed up at the majors, I'm looking at the US Open this year at Shinnecock, and I would put him in my top 3 favorite to win no matter what.
Ooh, I like that.
No
That's
matter
huge.
what.
That'd be so cool if Brooks can make his return to Shinnecock, a place where he's won before, right? He's won the US Open there before, and what a storybook that would be. But yeah, the interest level for Brooks, I think, is big, and the health question is big. Brooks, as we've talked about that knee, and we thought a reason why he went to LIV, why he took that big bag of money, right? Is that knee wasn't great. Brooks wouldn't be doing all this and playing in some of the lower tier events and paying a big fine if the knee wasn't healthy and if he wasn't extremely healthy. So I think that's a big thing for Brooks. So I think we're going to see a healthy Brooks, and I think that we're going to see an interested one, right? He's not going to want to play in those bottom tier events for very long, so he's going to get into those elevated events, if I had to guess.
How quickly do you think he can get back into them?
Maybe it'll probably take him mid-year. I think towards the end of the year, you might find him in an elevated event or two. I know we have a different elevated event, with Trump Durrell being in the mix this year. So I maybe towards the end of the year, he gets into one. I think he starts playing well towards the middle of the year, and then eventually finds himself, whether that be in that Aeon Swing 5 or whatnot.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it will be interesting to see how quickly or how sharp he looks that first week, right? Because that's going to tell us a lot.
Yeah, I think that first hole is going to be big too, right? Just to see how he looks. How do you think this affects other big names that come back to the tour? I know the player returning program applies to 3 players. It applies to Cam Smith, Bryson DeChambeau, and John Rahm. Players that have won a major since 2022 to 2025 can come back and face the similar sort of penalties that Brooks did. It's really interesting. First off, Phil Mickelson also won a major semi recently, but he won it in 2021. That's a huge spot there that Phil is not going to be able to come back let's go to the tour. I don't think he would anyway. I think he's pretty happy at LIV, especially at this point in his career. So that's really interesting. But in interviews with LIV and with separate entities, right? All three of them, Cam, John, and Bryson, all said they're going to stay on the LIV tour for 2026. I didn't think watching all three of them talk, I didn't think they were very committed answers. That they all kind of said that we're going to play here and kind of left it at that. They didn't really say much else. So I think things can change really quick, Josh. But from watching those clips and watching and thinking about it a little bit more, do you think there's a chance that any of them make their way back this year? The deadline is February 2nd if they wanted the same deal that Brooks had.
Well, we listened to Jon Rahm tell us for weeks and weeks and maybe months and months that he wasn't going to go to LIV, and then he actually did go to LIV.
Right. Things change quickly.
There's that. But I think, so to me, Brooks was the most obvious one to make the move. Cam Smith would be the second most obvious to make the move in my mind, just because he hasn't been playing that well over there. He doesn't look like the same golfer that he was, and he had a lot of promise. And at the end of the day, maybe a change of scenery for him, especially given that he's not playing as well now, would be a good thing. Flip side of that, I think Rahm is the least likely to leave, whether it be this year or next year, only because he's so fresh in that contract. Like, he only left a couple of years ago. One would assume that he's got at least another couple seasons on that, maybe a third season over there. So to me, unlikely, but Bryson is the ultimate question mark, because it would make complete sense in my mind for Bryson, because he's in the middle of contract negotiations, to leverage this and either get a boatload more money from LIV or jump back to the PGA Tour. But we've seen Bryson not follow the beat of the drum before. Like, he does things differently. Everything he does is different. And one thing that I think, no matter what people think LIV has done to some of these guys' credibility or taking the money, the Saudi money, et cetera, what that's done, I don't think anyone can really doubt Bryson's genuine interest in growing the game through non-traditional means. And because of that, I almost feel like Bryson doesn't totally care where he plays next year, this year. Like, he can play in the majors. He can more than contend in the majors. And he has the biggest following in professional golf, period. Like, I think he's I don't think it's a stretch to say he's a bigger star than Scottie Scheffler, even though Scottie Scheffler is on paper the better golfer. But he doesn't need to come back to the PGA Tour. He is probably the only person involved in this whole thing who can truly just decide to do whatever he wants, because he has all of the control. LIV really wants him. The PGA Tour would clearly love to have him back. And, at the end of the day, like, he is still going to do the stuff that he's been doing with social media and YouTube to grow golf and to continue growing his star. So, like, win-win-win, no matter what he does, right?
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing for me is that, Bryson would have to play a lot more on the PGA Tour. He'd have to come back and play in some of these non-elevated events. He wouldn't be able to just play in some elevated events and continue creating YouTube. So that, obviously, like you mentioned, it's a huge spot for Bryson to create content through these non-traditional means, through YouTube, through TikTok, through all this different stuff where he did the hole-in-one over his house, right? He did that whole series, and he's a really, really good content creator in that sense. And I think if he came to the PGA Tour, it would be more limiting, I think. So I think it's a really good spot for him to stay there. I would be very surprised if he came back. I do disagree with the Rahm thing, though. I think he's the most likely to come back. Jon Rahm has been a guy that's talked about legacy and how it matters to him. He talked about in press conferences where he's watched the old Masters tournaments and old PGA Tour tournaments on his phone right before the round. And I think he cares a lot about his legacy. And I think he cares a lot about, he talks about Seve all the time. And Seve obviously is a huge part of PGA Tour history, and it means so much to him. So I think John would have a path to come back in that sense. And we've seen him be frustrated over at LIV. And I know he says that he's going to stay on LIV for 2026, but like we just talked about, things change in a hurry. Jon Rahm declined to go to LIV, and then one day he was gone. So I think he could come back. We'll see in the next few weeks. It's probably not. He's not going to come back on his word. He's going to stay, but I wouldn't be surprised if he came back.
Could you imagine a scenario, and this is probably unlikely, but could you imagine a scenario where come the middle of February or late February or early March, non-elevated events, we have Rahm, Brooks, and or Bryson all playing?
It'd be amazing.
Like, as much as I know you feel like the penalties that these guys are facing are reasonable. I think if Rahm or Bryson decide that they want to play on the PGA Tour, I think they get to skip the line. they should get to skip the line, in my opinion, because they're both players who very
Yes.
much still
I
have
can
it.
get behind that, but
With Brooks Koepka, there's a genuine, like, does he still have it question. I think a lot of people, a lot of fans of his will say like he has it. And I think, when I really think about it, I think he does still have it and can get it back, but he wasn't in form recently. You can't make that same argument for Bryson and Rahm. Like, they're clearly still playing top level golf. We were just looking at the data golf rankings, and I think they're 3 and 10, right? Like, Bryson is 10 and Rahm is number 3 in the world per data golf. So like, those two should not have to live under the same rule and stipulation that the PGA Tour laid out for Brooks. And I wouldn't have a problem with different rules for those guys.
And that's why it's great that the PGA Tour has moved to a for-profit entity, because they can do these things. They can just change things on the dot, right? And they can say, well, play better, right? They can tell you that, back in before there was all these rules and all these different benchmarks that you have to hit. Now that Brooks does this paves the way. That is for sure true, but still things can change, and things can change in a hurry, and they will change, right? So I think that's good. Let's go talk about LIV a little bit more. They had some speculated guys over the offseason. Akshay Bhatia, Siwoo Kim, and Sanjay Im were all speculated to go to LIV. All 3 of them slammed the doors shut and said, nope, we're staying on the PGA Tour. Siwoo Kim, he tweeted out the I'm not leaving gif, which was awesome. And all 3 of them pretty much emphatically said, we're staying on the PGA Tour. And LIV biggest signings, Thomas Dietrich, who won on the PGA Tour, but most golf fans, if not a lot of them, are going to say, who's Thomas Dietrich? Victor Perez and Laurie Cantor. Those are their biggest signings this year. And what do you think? That begs the question. Do you think, like, losing Brooks and having these 3 not that large of names, how can LIV keep this going?
You have to be a real golf nerd or golf sicko to know who those guys are. And I mean that with the utmost respect to all.
I know who they are. That's for sure.
You know who they are, but like, in terms of what LIV is trying to do and trying to sell itself as a serious alternative to the PGA Tour, its chances of doing so absolutely crumbled this winter. We've got, like, you didn't even mention the team captain changes over there.
Oh yeah,
like,
they've done a few different rebrands for teams.
Like,
yeah,
you've got teams rebranding when, I think maybe like teams were just starting to have the opportunity to like take hold, like from like a fan perspective. Now you're changing the names of them. Their marketing is already a little wacky, a little wonky. Combine that with like all the rule changes that you're having, going to 72 holes, mirroring the PGA Tour, and just depleted fields. Like we talked about OWGR. I don't know how many points anybody's going to get playing or even winning or contending in a LIV event when strength of field is going to be absolutely abysmal now. So like, I don't know. I think here's what I'll say. Everybody needs to reframe, I guess, their expectations for what success looks like when it comes to LIV the organization, because clearly it doesn't have the same expectations internally as, say, the PGA Tour does, or even the European Tour, or even like literally anything that has to actually survive on its merit and not just be like essentially paid for by an entity that doesn't care if it is a profitable venture or successful venture or not.
Right. Yeah, and I really do think, and I know this might be a little bit out of left field and a little crazy, that LIV is going to die in the next few years. And I think, they just lose a ton of money. And, we talk about all the time how the Saudis have unlimited money, right? And that doesn't really matter. But I think it comes to a point where they're like, when we lose, they report I think they lost over 100 million last year. And, I think that comes to a fever pitch, right? And I think that's going to be one of the big reasons that happens. I think the second reason is they just eventually, they held this whole LIV PGA merger that we've talked about for the last few years. I think that eventually figures itself out, where these mid-tour guys, your Abraham Answers, are going to be able to figure out a way to come back to the PGA Tour. And they might get slapped on the wrist, but I think that's what they're going to have to do in a few years, whether they like it or not.
Yeah. And, I don't really know. It's interesting because I almost see a scenario where you could spin off what LIV is doing, the on-course competitive part. You could spin into the PGA Tour, and who knows, maybe they spin off some of the team element into TGL or something like that. I don't know, but just continuing to exist. I see a scenario where 5 years from now, they could be doing exactly what they're doing right now because the accounting just doesn't matter.
Right. That's true.
But at the same time, I could see a scenario where in 2 years they're closing up shop and they're done. It's, unrolled somehow, and players are just going back to the PGA Tour or their post professional golf lives.
Yeah, good thing you brought up TGL. I'm excited to see Brooks Koepka on TGL. I think TGL has been a fun product to watch. We saw Jupiter Lynx take one of their first leads last night, and then they end up losing the match. But still, that's been a lot of fun to watch. Just seeing Tiger Woods. He didn't play last night, obviously, but he was there. He was, wanted to throw the hammer a couple times. They had Max Homa, Kevin Kisner had to really rein him in from throwing the hammer a little bit more. But it's cool. We talked about Brooks, and he's excited to have Brooks back. And I think, like we talked about earlier, most people are. And so I just think that's really cool all around.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I think one of the things that I've been trying to keep front of mind when, people are talking about all of these different issues and stuff is at the end of the day, this is an entertainment product and it needs to be entertaining, period. And that means big brands, big names like Brooks Koepka, even if they aren't playing the best, still get priority, still get back in.
Yeah, that's where CEO Brian Rolap really, I think, hits the nail right on the head with the entertainment factor. Being able to bring a guy like Brooks back in the span of a couple of weeks, right, and not stretching this out a year, and being a for-profit entity and being able to make decisions that A, make money, and B, are more entertaining for everyone watching the tour and people playing on the tour. I think that's huge.
Yeah, and you know what? Something else that just sort of occurred to me, and this is really interesting. I think Anthony Kim is LIV's most interesting storyline now.
He just qualified the other day through the LIV Golf promotions. He got relegated and then got qualified again.
He's playing, he appears to be playing better. And on top of that, I don't really think in context of LIV Golf, I don't think Bryson DeChambeau is that interesting of a story. If he wins, of course, he's the best player there by a country mile. People care more about watching Bryson in majors or on YouTube, on his YouTube channel, because he does interesting stuff there. But watching him win an exhibition match, God knows where, I don't think that moves the needle as much as for LIV, Anthony Kim showing some kind of form this year, or maybe even potentially winning over there. I think that would be a bigger thing for LIV. Agree? Disagree? Think I'm crazy?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think you make fun of me sometimes for rooting for the small guy and wanting the small guy to win, right? And building these legacies, right? But I think it's true. People love an underdog story, right? Anthony Kim, this guy that was huge on the scene back in almost the end of the Tiger days, right? And he gets this career injury, right? And goes through other stuff personally where he's forced out of professional golf for a long time. He now comes back and he's on the rival tour, he's on the Saudi back tour, but still it's a really, really cool story for anybody that likes golf. For anybody that's interested in professional golf, it's a really cool story. He plays really bad, mixes some good golf in there, falls down. It looks like he's on the way back up, and that would be really, really cool. He's now signed with Melbourne, right? For what he'll be wearing, and that's really cool too because that connects with people. And I think this Anthony Kim story is, like you said, LIV's best story right now.
Yeah, easily. All right, let's get into this coming week because there is golf to be played.
Yes, professional golf on the PGA Tour in 2026. It's just amazing. We're so, like I said at the beginning of the episode, we're used to starting last week at the Century in Hawaii, but we had to wait an extra week. We're still in Hawaii though. We're at a non-elevated event here at Wiley's Country Club in Hawaii. 7 of the top 20 in OWGR are going to be playing, and I think that's significant because some of these elevated events you lack some of that, but the fact that they didn't play an event last week and guys need to change their schedules up a little bit. You have some guys playing in the TGL last night, like Max Homa, Akshay Bhatia. Some of these guys were playing last night, so they're not going to be in the event. But still, 7 of the top 20 is not something to scoff at. It's a really good start for the PGA Tour, I think, when being pressed with some of these conditions where they couldn't play an elevated event last week. So a good job by them. Last year, we saw Canadian Nick Taylor win this event at 16 under, won a playoff against a guy I have had fortune making money on DraftKings. Well, making money on DraftKings, Nico Echeverria. So always going to root for Nico in my mind for that sense. Russell Henley's the favorite. Hideki's right behind him at 17-1. Him and Ben Griffin. Spawn 18-1. Siwoo Kim 20-1. Josh, what do you have to say about the first week of the year? And also, give me a pick. Give me some predictions for the week. Whatever you're thinking.
I'm interested to see how those top 10 or so guys that are playing, I'm interested to see how they're going to perform. Let's get into picks. For me, when I'm looking through the list, I'm thinking back to who finished with the right kind of momentum that could carry into this year. And as I'm looking through the odds and I'm looking at different names, I kept going back to Ben Griffin. He finished last year with the right kind of momentum, and he was one of those players that really didn't look like he had reached the pinnacle of his potential. And he's got the experience. I think especially in a non-signature event environment, I think he could come out and win the damn thing. Could happen.
Yeah, I like it. Ben Griffin obviously, had those close calls at the end of the year. You got Scotty Scheffler in an event in the fall series, then played well in the Ryder Cup. So I like that pick a lot. Griffin, I think he's the third favorite, right? I mentioned right 17 or 18 to 1 on DraftKings. Yep. I like Morikawa. I think I'm going to go in the inverse where you were looking, a guy that hasn't had very good form, didn't play good last year, hasn't won an event on the PGA Tour since 2023, which is crazy. How good Collin Morikawa is, I don't understand how he doesn't win more. But yeah, that's kind of the thing for me. 20 to 1 on Morikawa. In the 2 starts he's made at Wiley Country Club here, T21 in 2020, T27 in 2021. So decent starts. I like Collin Morikawa. It's the problem with the putter for Collin. His ball striking is very good. If the putter can get warm for him, I think he can be really good. Do you have any long shots this week? Anybody you're looking down the board that you like?
It's not a long shot, but it was another name that was kind of in that like middle range that seemed interesting. Bob McIntyre at 22 to 1. He's one of those guys who has better than average game. Like he's a top 20 player, right? And at that number, 22 to 1 over on FanDuel, it seems like something I'd be willing to put a couple bucks on.
I'm going to go with my long shots, Matt McCarty at 50 to 1, the younger player. I'm in another one and done league this year. Josh, I've been doing it the last few years where you pick a guy and then you can't pick him again. So I'm going, you don't want to pick too many guys too early. So I'm going to go with Matt McCarty this week, and I'll keep giving you guys long shots all year. Just be advised, my PGA Tour picking isn't always great. Sometimes it's better than others, but we're going to have a good year this year.
I was going to say, maybe this is the season we do a little accounting along the way here.
Let's do that.
We have some accountability built into some of these picks, because you, my friend, are famous for picking some of the most absurd long shots. And have any of them ever cleared?
Not that much. I will say, though, I like that idea where we can kind of have some accountability and do some talking. Paul Russo, if you're out there, write down our picks and come up with a little spreadsheet we can have going on for the year. Now, Paul, you don't have to do that. I can do it. But still, it's going to be really interesting, and we can have a little go back and forth. I like it. I like that idea.
Maybe we'll have to get Stat Guy Paul back in here to break that down afterward. Let's talk predictions. I want to drop one right up front. Scotty Scheffler is going to win 2 majors.
Ooh, I like that. That's awesome.
I think he's going to finish off the career Grand Slam.
I was looking at it, and Scotty Scheffler, I think it was FanDuel. He was right around like minus 120, 130 to win 1 major, and that interests me.
Yeah, that's a crazy. Like, that's a crazy line.
Especially in like the Masters, when there's only usually like 60-ish players. And of course, he's played very well at, and it seems like a tournament he's the last 3 or 4 years. He's won it twice, and he's always in contention, even if he doesn't win.
Yeah, and also I think one of the things that really to me makes Scotty such an interesting pick for all the majors is he doesn't have to be leading on Friday or halfway through Saturday to win on Sunday. Like,
probably shoot 61 on Saturday, right?
Across the board, like, I think the most impressive part of Scotty's game is his ability to come back late Saturday or on Sunday to win. That makes a huge, huge difference.
And I think his caddy, Ted Scott, I think that's not talked about enough. He's one of the best caddies on the PGA Tour, and being able to tell Scotty where he needs to be on the green, where he needs to be on the fairway to have the right shot shape is really valuable. And I think that just having that voice of reason on the bag and being able to hit the shots that Ted wants you to do too is pretty important. But yeah, he's a really good caddy.
You know what I think not enough people talk about in terms of when people talk about like player caddy relationships, there's always this like ham and egg kind of dynamic of like they have to kind of like work well together, whatever the case may be. I think Scotty Scheffler and Ted Scott might just be like the 2 most like-minded human beings in golf caddy, in player caddy form on tour. Like, I think so too. They might as well be sharing the same type of brain. And whether you're talking about like how they view golf, how they have their faith, obviously, which is a huge thing for them, just it makes complete sense to see them operate the way they do out on the golf course, because they clearly are just like a match made in golf heaven, apparently.
Yeah, and if you were Ted Scott, I think you'd be silly not to lean into that, right? Because I think it's talked about that Ted Scott has the best job in the world of being the caddy for the best golfer to hit the planet in the last however much time. So I think that's really cool.
What's your prediction for the year?
So I talked about LIV and how I think it could die in the next few years. I think by the end of the year, we'll have a more clear pathway for these lower tier guys to come back to the PGA Tour. I think whether it be through a player returning program or rules set up where guys can, if they want to, and they're certainly going to, I would think would be mid-tier guys that want to come back. And I think they're going to have more grounds for that. For the PGA Tour side, I think Cam Young is going to have a really good breakout year. We saw him win at the end of the year at the Wyndham. We saw him play really well at Bethpage in the Ryder Cup. He's a really stoic character and one that's definitely can be polarizing sometimes where people don't love him, but I think he's gained a lot of popularity over the last few years. The way he hits the golf ball, the way he presents himself, I think is good. And I think he was one of the better players at the Ryder Cup. So I think Cam Young, maybe win an elevated event, play well at the majors. I think that's a really good opportunity too. He sits at 19th in the world right now. I think he gets inside the top 10 as well.
I could definitely see that. Is there anybody that you're watching who really needs a good 2026 campaign?
Max Homa for sure.
Really?
Max needs one. I mean, obviously missed the Ryder Cup, played really well in Rome at the Ryder Cup, and you figured he would be a shoo-in last year for the Ryder Cup. Misses it, he's not even talked about, right? And I think Max needs to hit that career reset button over the offseason. I think he comes in flying. That's another one of my predictions. I think Max plays well this year. We saw him contend in majors a couple of years ago at the Masters. So we'll see if Max can figure it out. I think he does. Do you have a guy that you're thinking of?
Yeah, and Max was one of the guys that I was thinking about, but I think Wyndham needs it more.
Yeah.
I think Wyndham Clark, in terms of guys who had a lot of promise, who were the right age, who when they broke out, they looked like they were going to have a pretty good run and just really, really has not looked good for about a year and a half now. And even last year, we started to see like the mental side of the game appeared to be coming apart at the seams a little bit. So I think Wyndham Clark needs a big year to get his game back. Clearly he has the potential, but he's, fall back. He's near, I think he's between 46th and 50th in the world. He's, that last win now, early 2024 out at Pebble. It was that rain shortened three round event that I've criticized the hell out of for a year and a half now. But he needs to prove himself again. And I believe this would be his last year of eligibility in the elevated events, the signature events by default. So even more important that he gets back on the horse this year. Much the same for Max Homa, though.
Yeah, Wyndham Clark has obviously faced a lot of backlash off the field, right? And, breaking that locker at Oakmont and doing some other, throwing clubs here and there. And so he definitely needs to benefit from a good year playing on the golf course.
Do you think we can get through this year without any players getting arrested?
I think so. I think we're through that. We didn't have one last year, right?
Yeah. I mean, I just wondered if we could get 2 years back to back.
Maybe if Scotty, we had Scotty get arrested during Happy Gilmore 2. Does that count?
Yeah, we'll put an asterisk by it.
Anything else, Josh, you're looking at for the 2026 year?
That's it. I'm just anxious to start to see some golf. I want to see a couple events before I start making any super bold predictions because, you never know who's going to have it when they come back out or what players are going to surprise us here as we get into the first couple weeks.
Well, it's always fun in Hawaii too. We get some primetime golf with the time change, right? Yeah. So you can flip on some golf tomorrow evening, right, and watch it as you're winded down for the day, which I always think is fun whenever we get golf in California or further over. I think that's going to do it then, Josh. For the first episode of Out of Bounds is in the books here in 2026. Thank you so much for watching and subscribing. Follow us on TikTok and YouTube. We do a great job, Josh and I, jumping on TikTok and jumping on YouTube Shorts when a big thing happens. So be sure to hit that follow button so you stay updated and like and comment. I love seeing comments of people talking about what's going on. So that's good. Also, we have a website, outofbounds.golf. And I think that's a really good spot too, where you can also find content that's happening in the golf world. So be sure to go over to there. And that's all for today. So whether it's down the middle or out of bounds, keep on swinging.
You've been listening to Out of Bounds. If it's coverage, debate, or discussion of pro and local golf, we'll be talking about it. Be sure to visit the website. Find us on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. See you next time on Out of Bounds.